Merry Christmas, everyone. Whether you're watching this actually on Christmas Eve in the evening or Christmas morning or some other time, we here at Crossview, the board, myself and my wife, LaDawn, we want to just wish you a Merry, Merry Christmas. And we pray that you are blessed and that this Christmas service finds you with joy and peace and all of that. Well, today I want to talk about one of the most Christmassy, Christianese, Christmas words out there, and that is the word Emmanuel. Okay, Emmanuel. I don't know how many different Christmas songs it pops up in. Many modern and older Christmas songs are about Emmanuel, right? And how many Christian Christmas cards have the word Emmanuel in them? It means God with us. Now, it appears only once in the New Testament in the Christmas story in Matthew 1, and I'm going to put that up here right now. Matthew chapter 1, Matthew says, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. And he's quoting Isaiah 7:14 there. And then this is what Isaiah 7:14 said. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. By the way, Joseph and Mary never actually named Jesus Emmanuel. They named Jesus Jesus, okay? Matthew isn't taught, the angel here, Matthew isn't quoting Isaiah here to say that Jesus' name should actually be Emmanuel. He's giving Jesus a title from Scripture, saying that Jesus will be God with us. But what does this really mean for us today? Okay? We've sung this song so many times. We've got the Christmas cards. You know, we know this word Emmanuel. We've probably heard many Christmas sermons on the word Emmanuel and the fact that it means God with us. But when we say now today, when we talk about it, you know, when athletes before a big race or before a game talk about God is with us, when we go through a tough time and we say God is with us, what do we mean by that? You know, my younger sister Kim was the cutest little thing when we were little. And she was terrified when she was really little. She was petrified of thunderstorms. And she was so cute. And one of the things that would make me laugh and would make the rest of us laugh is sometimes when thunderstorms would go off, she would get so terrified by the thunder, by the loud noises, that she would repeat over and over again, Jesus is with me. Jesus is with me. Jesus is with me. Okay? Jesus is with me. Now, it's a cute story, again, but what does it mean? I mean, it's such a cute story, and we Christians so believe it. God is with us. But what do we really mean when we say that? When my little sister would say, Jesus is with me, did it mean that we physically saw Jesus come into the room? Like, could we see him when she would make that statement? Could we look somewhere and say, there is Jesus? Well, no. When she said, Jesus is with me, did the storm suddenly just stop? Obviously not. No. Did Jesus take away her fear when she said, Jesus is with me? Did Jesus take away her fear? And the answer is no to that too. That's why she had to keep repeating it. And every time there was a new thunderstorm, she would have to say it again. So what does it mean that God is with us? What do we mean? If we can't see God, now sometimes we can get a sense of his presence. There's these precious sort of miraculous moments when we get a sense of his presence. But there's other times when we say God is with us and we're in the midst of something really hard and we can't feel it at all. We feel alone. So what did Matthew mean when he wrote, his name shall be Emmanuel, God with us? And what do we mean when we say that God is with us? And what is it supposed to mean, God is with us? Well, in order to answer that question, we have to go back in time. Okay, we have to go back in time because we modern Christians have become very comfortable. It's just our assumption now. We become very comfortable with this idea that there is only one God. Okay, that's obvious to all of us. We're just born into that. That's centuries and centuries and centuries that we've just been born into this idea that there's only one God, which is true, by the way, obviously. But we just take it for granted. There's only one God, and he's huge. He's everywhere. He's omnipresent, okay? He created the universe, and you can't go anywhere where God isn't, okay? We just so those assumptions are just ingrained, and they're true assumptions, obviously. They're real, they're good assumptions. But those assumptions are just so ingrained in us, we can't imagine people thinking about God any other way. And that's why we have to go back in time. Because in the ancient Near East, in the time when the Old Testament was written, the people of the ancient Near East did not think of God that way. Okay? They did not have a concept of one God who made the whole universe out of nothing, who is omnipresent. Instead, ancient peoples thought that there was many gods, pantheons of gods. And there was a god for this and a god for that. There was a god for fertility and a god for rain, and there were gods for war, and there were all kinds of different gods. Now, many of them, if we go back in the Old Testament, many ancient peoples in the ancient Near East, not just in the Bible, but in the nations surrounding Israel, also had this idea of the gods being localized, like a god was a god in a certain place, but then another place would have a different god. Okay, and this just we don't even, this is not our mindset today at all. Like, this just seems bizarre to us. But I'll just show you a couple of passages in the Old Testament. Okay, and we have to look at this, how ancient people used to think about God, to sort of get past our modern assumptions, so that we can get to this place of really trying to understand and answer the question, what does Emmanuel, God with us, mean? What does it mean that God is with me? Okay? So first we look at 1 Kings chapter 20, and the Israelites had just finished defeating the Aramean army. And the generals of the Aramean army had a very interesting explanation. When they went back to their king, they had a very interesting explanation to their king as to why they had lost the battle. Here's what they said, 1 Kings 20, verse 23. Meanwhile, the officials of the king of Aram advised him, their gods are gods of the hills. That is why they were too strong for us. But if we fight them on the plains, surely we will be stronger than they. Now again, I find verses like these in the Old Testament actually funny. Okay, and we can find these funny now. But this just doesn't even make sense to our modern mindset. Like, God would only be God of the hills. Like, God is the God of everything. He made the whole universe. But back in those days, people didn't think that way. Okay? Gods were attached, or many of the gods were attached to certain locations. I'll just show you one more example, because I just find these stories really interesting and also, just a little bit funny and stuff too. It's always good to have a little bit of fun in the Old Testament. But there's this story, in 2 Kings, the Assyrians have deported the Israelites, the northern 10 tribes. They've deported them, and they've conquered them, and all that sort of stuff. And now the king of Assyria sends back new citizens from Assyria to populate the land of northern Israel, the northern 10 tribes. And when they do that, well, we'll just read it. It was reported to the king of Assyria, the people you deported and resettled in the towns of Samaria do not know, notice this, what the God of that country requires. Therefore, he has sent lions among them, which are killing them off because the people do not know what he requires. Now, this is interesting to me. So the king of Assyria sends back people from his country to go and settle in the land of northern Israel. And there's some lion attacks. And what do they chalk this up to? They say, well, the God of northern Israel, we got to figure out what. So there's a God there. It's different than our gods in Assyria. We got to know, what does that God require, right? So these people had a very distinct idea about gods. Each place, area, nation had its own gods that were in charge of that area. And you had to be careful about that. So there wasn't this assumption about one big, gigantic, infinite, omnipresent, which just means everywhere, God. Now, the thing you have to understand is that the Israelites were like this too. They were just like the people of the ancient Near East. They weren't special. God just chose them. They weren't special in the sense that they were better than everybody else or smarter than everybody else. They were just like everybody else, but God chose them as the descendants of Abraham. Okay? So the Israelites were like this too. They believed the same as the people around them believed, which, by the way, is why the first commandment out of the big 10 commandments, the first commandment is, okay, Exodus 20, commandment number 1 of the big 10 is, God says to the people of Israel, you shall have no other gods before me. By the way, I just want you to notice, first off, the first commandment does not say, the first commandment is there are no other gods. Okay, that's not what he says. The first commandment is not, there is only one God and you must worship him. That's not what it says either. The first commandment is you shall have no other gods before me. The assumption behind this command is these people do believe there are other gods. They believe there's other gods. Just like the surrounding nations, they believe there's other gods. When they get the 10 Commandments, they're not like, their mindset is not like the mindset of a modern Christian today. They do not have a concept of one infinite, universal God, and it's only him and all this sort of stuff. Their idea is just that their God, they're just supposed to worship their God alone. It's not that there are no other gods. It's just that their God, Yahweh, the God of Israel, demands their worship and their worship alone. By the way, this is why they keep being tempted. Have you ever noticed, like most of the, not most, but a huge chunk of the Old Testament it retells the story over and over and over again of how the Israelites continually fall back into idolatry. And have you ever thought about it? Because it just, most of you watching this right now, most of us have never even been tempted to get up in the morning, make a little idol and worship it. And yet that is the biggest, most common, most grievous sin throughout the Old Testament. And we sometimes maybe in our modern mindsets go like, why do these people keep doing this? And the answer is because that's what people back then believed. They didn't have our mindset. They thought there were many gods. So when you feel like your God isn't coming through for you, when you feel like Yahweh, your God of Israel, when your wife is, can't get pregnant, or your crops are failing, or one of your children is deathly ill, and you feel like Yahweh he's not answering, you feel like he's not answering, and things are going wrong, and you're in your mindset, you actually believe that there's many gods out there. Well, it's very tempting then. Well, maybe I'll throw up a couple of prayers or to some of these other gods or to this God, and maybe that God will answer my prayer. That's why it's tempting. It's not tempting to us because we don't have that mindset. To them, totally tempting. It just made sense to them. Of course, there's lots of gods out there. That's what they believed. Now, this is part of the whole purpose of the Exodus story. This is part of the whole purpose of the book of Exodus. It's why in Exodus, the 10 Commandments is central to the book of Exodus. And the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. But the whole story of the Exodus, the part of the big purpose, there's a few different things going on there, not just one. But part of the big purpose of the story of Exodus is God is showing the Egyptians, the surrounding nations, and the people of Israel that he is not just a local God, he is God everywhere, even in Egypt. That's part of the whole point of all the plagues is the God of Israel is in Egypt, and he's pulling off these plagues in Egypt, which is pretty revolutionary. That's in the ancient times, for a God to be able to pull off miracles in another God's country shows that this is more than just a local God. This is not like just one of the other gods, okay? And so the Israelites are learning about their God at the same time, okay? They're also learning, okay, oh wow, we do need to worship this God. He is powerful. He's more powerful than the Egyptian gods. Now, then God has the Israelites go out to meet him in the wilderness, right? So they go through the 10 plagues. They leave Egypt. They're out in the wilderness, right? And where do they go? They go to Mount Sinai to meet with God because that's where he chooses to reveal himself. Now, to the Israelites, however, they think Sinai, remember, these are people with an ancient mindset. This is hard for them. They're learning. The Bible shows us this journey of how God is revealing himself in the Old Testament to the people of Israel. But over time, he's increasing the revelation of who he is. So they actually think in the book of Exodus, God chooses to reveal himself to them at Mount Sinai, but they think he actually lives there. Again, they're still in this local God mindset. Very interesting. That's why throughout the book of Exodus, Mount Sinai is called the mountain of God. But there's the beauty of what's going to happen in Exodus is God is going to up their revelation. Remember, we're going to come back to God is God with us. But first we have to start with where, that this whole sermon is about Emmanuel, God with us. But we just take some things about God with us so for granted. We got to go back in time and look at at our assumptions and look at what people used to believe about God. So at Mount Sinai now, God is going to take the people of Israel, their revelation of who he is. He wants to take it up a notch. He wants to reveal more of how powerful and amazing he is, okay? And what he's going to do is there's going to be this tremendous shift is that God in the book of Exodus is going to go from being, where Sinai is the mountain of God, God is actually going to give instructions to Moses to build, to craft a tent, a huge tent with thick curtains called the Tabernacle. Okay? And after that, God is actually going to move from this remote location. Because think of it. Can you imagine if your belief about God was God lives out on a mountain in the middle of the desert somewhere? Like if you want to go into God's presence, you got to go way out into a wilderness somewhere to this mountain, Mount Sinai, to meet with him. But what happens in the book of Exodus is on Mount Sinai, God gives Moses instructions for the tabernacle, and now God is going to move into this tent. And instead of just being on a mountain in the middle of a desert, he's going to move into this tent, and that tent is going to move with the Israelites, and now God is going to move with them. He's not just going to be God in one place. He's going to be God to a people, and he's going to move with that people. It's really amazing. Now, you have to see the connection. Many of us miss this. The connection between Mount Sinai and the tabernacle is a really big deal in the book of Exodus. And so I want to show you this because Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, it's a detail that many of us miss out on, but Mount Sinai is divided up into three, we could call them levels or tiers, maybe stages, whatever you want to call, but it's three different levels. And as you move through the levels, less and less people can go there, okay? So there's three tiers to Mount Sinai. I'm going to show you this, okay? The first tier is the very base of the mountain, okay? So everyone in the nation of Israel can go to the base. They can't go onto the base. They can't touch the base, but they can go up to the base. It says in Exodus 19, verse 12, God just says, put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it, the base of it, okay? They were meant to gather to the mountain, but they couldn't go on the mountain, okay? So that's tier one. Tier one is the base. All of Israel is supposed to come to the base, but they can't go up on the base. But then there was a second level to the mountain, okay? And again, this is one we often miss, but there's this obscure, weird little story in Exodus in the whole Mount Sinai section in chapter 24. I had to cut a few bits out. It would be nice to just take time and just go through this whole passage. There's some really cool stuff in there. But we'll just look at this. Moses and Aaron. So the whole nation of Israel comes to the base of the mountain, and then they have to stop. Nobody's allowed to even touch it. You got to stop at the base, no further. But Moses and Aaron's sons, and the 70 elders of Israel. So Moses and a small group of the main leaders, and Aaron the priest, the head Levite priest, went up and saw the God of Israel. Okay? So they went up. So the whole nation of people can get to the base. Then just Moses and these leaders can go up the mountain. But they don't go all the way up the mountain, because the next verse tells us that Moses went further. The third level is the summit, and it's for Moses only, possibly Joshua. It's hard to kind of understand some of the stuff in the passage. It gets a little confusing. But verse 12 says this, next verse, the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain. So him and the elders are already up on the mountain, so obviously they're not at the top, and stay here. So Moses said to the elders, wait here for us until we come back to you. And him and Joshua go higher. Now, I don't know if Joshua goes all the way to the top of them or if Joshua waits, but whatever the case, only Moses, or maybe Moses and Joshua, but the summit is very restricted. The summit is restricted to only the top leader. Now, what's interesting here is that this is then exactly what happens when God gives instructions to Moses for building the tabernacle. The tabernacle is again built in a three-tiered structure. And I've got a diagram up there on the TV. Three tiers of the tabernacle, just like Sinai. So the outside rectangle, that's the outer court. Now, anybody from the nation of Israel could come into the outer court, okay? But then you'll notice a darker rectangle within the outer court, and you'll notice there's two rooms to it. One is called the holy place. Now, the holy place, only the priests could go into the holy place. And not even all of them. They cast lots. There was different things, and they took turns. But only the Levites, only priests could go into the second room. Just like, remember, Mount Sinai, only Moses and the leaders could go up on the mountain. Only the priests go into the holy place. And then there's one more room, and each of these is divided off by thick, thick curtains. And there's this one room called the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, and only one person, the high priest, on only one day of the year could go into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement to offer special sacrifice for the nation of Israel. So in a sense, what's happening in the book of in the book of Exodus, which many of us Christians miss, is that the tabernacle is becoming like a portable Mount Sinai. Okay? So God is going from this God that's just stuck in one place out in the middle of the wilderness. They already know he's powerful. Okay? He's powerful enough to go into Egypt and conquer the Egyptian gods, but now he's going from just living at this mountain in the wilderness, he's going to move into this tent, and he's going to actually live with the Israelites. Now, so that's an improvement. God is going with them as a nation. Okay? It's an improvement, it's an upgrade. God is increasing his revelation to them of who he is. They're still not at a place where, like Christians are today, where we understand that God is everywhere, that he's omnipresent, right? But I want you to notice two things about this understanding of God. Once he goes into the tabernacle from Mount Sinai, I want you to notice two things, though, about their understanding of God. Their understanding of God is still local. He is not everywhere. He's in the most holy place, okay? He's moving with them, that's an improvement. That's great. He's going with them as a nation, not so much with them as individuals. Like an individual person wouldn't think of God being right next to them, but he's with them as a nation. He's in their midst in the tabernacle, but he's still local because he's in that one place. He's still remote, though. I want you to notice how remote he is. Nobody in the nation of Israel has an idea of God being directly with them. To come into the presence of God was a scary thing. Only the priests could get into the holy place, and only one person on one day of the year could go right into the presence of God. Okay? So their understanding of God was he was local. Okay? He was in this one place. He wasn't everywhere, and he is still remote. He's distant from them in the sense that there are curtains that are separating them from God. Now, over time in the Old Testament, God by his Spirit is revealing more and more and more of himself to the Israelites. And by the time we get to King Solomon, and King Solomon builds a temple, okay? And he builds the temple with 3 tiers, just like we see in the tabernacle, an outer court, a holy place, a most holy place. But while he's praying to dedicate the temple, Solomon says something really profound. And for the time, quite revolutionary. He says this in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. He says, "But will God really dwell on earth?" That's a very interesting statement. Solomon is saying, God is too big. The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built. So now this is amazing. The Holy Spirit has now revealed to Solomon, they've gone to another level of understanding about God, that no longer is Solomon thinking about God as he would just live in one place. He could be contained at Sinai, or he could be contained in just this one room in the temple. He says, no way. God can't be contained in a temple. He's too big for the earth. He's too big for the universe, the heavens, okay? He has now built a temple as a place for people to pray, but he no longer thinks that this temple can contain God. So his revelation of who God is has improved. No longer does he understand God as being localized in one place. Solomon now has an understanding of God that he's too big. He's universal in the sense of omnipresent. He's not just in one place. He's far too big to be held down in one place. I want you to notice, though, again, that in this picture of God, God is still remote. In order, yes, God is too big to be held in by the temple, but to really get into his presence, for those special precious sacrifices, there's still a holy of holies, and still only the high priest one day a year can go into that room. God is still, in a sense, now he's too big, but he's still distant from the common person. And this is basically where things stayed for the Jewish people as a whole over the next bunch of centuries, okay? And this is the Jewish view. Now, it's not the view of the surrounding nations. The Romans, the Greeks, they still believed in numbers of gods and localized gods and all kinds of stuff like this. But this was the Jewish understanding of God. They had come to realize that there is only one God, the God of the universe. He's massive. He can't be held into a temple, but he's still quite remote. He's hard to approach. It's only through sacrifices and the high priest and the Holy of Holies. Not just anyone can get that close to him. And it is into this understanding of God that Matthew writes and the New Testament writers make a shocking claim. That this one God of the universe who made absolutely everything, who is far too big to be contained by a temple or to just be said to be in one place like a mountain, like Mount Sinai. He can't be contained by the heavens or the earth. Into this understanding of God, the New Testament writers in Matthew chapter 1 make this incredible claim that in Jesus, God is no longer remote, distant, removed from us. That somehow in Jesus, the God of the universe, who can't be contained by a temple, who can't be contained by the heavens, the universe, who can't be contained by all of creation, has somehow, in some miraculous way, put on a human body and come and live among us. Okay? So in Jesus, God with us, God becomes no longer remote. Now, what does it mean now that God is with us? And there's actually many things. We could look at just a whole host of different things, okay? I just want to look at two. What does it mean that God is with us? First of all, in Jesus, he identifies with us deeply and cares for us. It's not so much about geographical placement, okay? What I mean by that is, when we say God is with us, it's not so much about, is God, right here beside me? Well, yes, He is, because we understand him to be omnipresent. The earth can't contain him. He's everywhere, okay? We do have that understanding of God. But when we say God is with us, it's not so much about where is he, because he isn't in one place, like on Mount Sinai or in the Holy of Holies. He is everywhere. When we say God with us, there's another angle on this. When God took on flesh and lived among us, he identified with us as a human being. He knows us. Yes, he is everywhere. But more than that, he understands us. He feels with us in our pain. He has himself experienced death. He has himself experienced rejection. He has himself humbled himself and walked in our shoes. When we say God is with us, it's not that he just suddenly physically appears so we can see him, or that he takes away all of our problems, or that he makes it so that we don't feel fear anymore. When we say God is with us, a big part of what we mean is that God is on our side. He knows what we're going through. Yes, he is with us in the sense that he's omnipresent, which is wonderful. But more than that, he cares about us. He understands us, and he knows what we're going through. But there's one more thing I want to talk about, and again, there's others. Something even bigger, I think. Something really profound. When Jesus was on the cross, something big happened in the temple. Okay? Something big happened in the temple. Can you remember what it was? As Jesus hung on the cross, what miraculous thing happened in the temple? Well, if we go to Matthew 27, verse 50, many of you will remember this right away. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Okay? Now you have to understand, this is a very thick curtain. This was not just some thin little curtain. This is a very thick, almost like a wall curtain. Okay? And as Jesus hangs on the cross, God's Spirit rips it in two. Now, this symbolizes all kinds of things. Okay? Like there's so much. If you look in the commentaries, there's probably 6 or 7 or 8 literally different things that are going on in this curtain being torn in two thing, okay? Which is really amazing, okay? But one of the things that is happening here is that Jesus is saying, like what a powerful symbolic moment. Jesus is saying, I'm done with the temple. God is saying, I'm done with the temple. I'm done with people thinking that the only way to approach me, they already knew he couldn't be contained by the temple, but still when they wanted to approach him, it was all through the sacrificial system, the holy place, the Holy of Holies, and all these tiers of approaching him. And he's saying, I'm done with that. That's out. The sacrificial system is out. The temple is out. That is the end. We're going back to what it was always meant to be. Now, we could spend many hours on this, but I'm drawing this to a close already. If you were an ancient person, if we go back to Genesis 1 for just a moment, if you were an ancient person who was able to read, which is very rare, so more likely you were hearing it, but if you were an ancient person who was hearing or reading what we now call Genesis chapter 1, okay? If you were reading that or listening to it, it would have sounded to your ancient mind, not to our modern minds, but it would have sounded to your ancient mind very much like it had parallels to the rituals surrounding how temples were built and consecrated. How after a temple was built and consecrated, at the end of it, the surrounding nations would always talk about their gods moving into the temple and they would be at rest. Just like this, on the seventh day, God rested, and lots of other things like that. Okay. Now, because of that, something we often miss in our modern, because we just don't understand that old worldview. But ancient people, Genesis 1, temple, part of what the writer of Genesis 1 is trying to get across to us, and when God rests on the seventh day, is that when God made the universe and the earth, the earth was meant to be his temple, the whole earth. From the very beginning, God never wanted to be confined. He never wanted people to think of him as being confined to one place. That the only, the only sacred place where God is this one room behind another bigger court, or only on the top of a mountain, and there's the middle of the mountain, only some people can get there, and only the base of the mountain. No, God never wanted to be confined, that there's only this one special place where God is. From the very beginning of Scripture, when God created the universe, he created the universe to be his temple. The whole earth is meant to be his temple. Okay? And I want you to think about this for just a moment. Think about in all those centuries with the tabernacle in the temple. When the priests would when the high priest, particularly on the Day of Atonement, would have gone through all their rituals, washing, the special washing of their hands, of their body, of their garments, putting on special garments, the sacrifice, all the rituals, the incense fire, and all the things they had to do before they would go into the Holy of Holies. And all the priests and all the people would have been in awe, like, wow, what a spiritual, powerful spiritual moment. And these spiritual rituals that these priests are doing to approach God, that's so intensely spiritual, it's so intensely powerful, because God is in that space. And yet in Genesis 1, we find that there is no one place, Holy of Holies. In fact, the entire earth is God's Holy of Holies. So that human beings, all of us, were meant to live our lives in the Holy of Holies, not just doing some super spiritual rituals, but when we do life, everyday human life, those are like the high priest preparing himself to go into the Holy of Holies. And at the cross, when Jesus rips the temple curtain in two, he's getting rid of the temple system again. And he's returning us to the place it was always meant to be, where the whole earth is God's Holy of Holies. And so when we say that God is with us, another thing, there's multiple things we could say here, but another part of what we're saying is, in ancient times, they had to do all of these rituals for one person to get into this place where he could say, I am with God. And now we live our whole lives in that very place. God is with us. And everyday life is his Holy of Holies. Everyday life, you taking care of people, you going to work, you serving your family, your neighborhood, your community, and you loving people and being productive and resting and playing and having a rhythm of life. All of that is equivalent to the rituals and the spiritual activities that those priests did in the Holy of Holies. Everyday life is spiritual. Now, this doesn't mean that everything we do is good. We make bad choices when we live selfishly, violently, lustfully. But the opportunity is there that in everything we do, we can literally do everything we do for Jesus, for God, as an act of worship. And in that sense, God is with us. Not with us in the sense that nothing bad will ever happen to us again, or that we can physically see him, or that we can physically sense his presence whenever things are troubling, even though sometimes he does give us those precious senses of his presence, which are really wonderful, but sometimes we go through hard things and we feel lonely. He's not with us in that sense that we're going to have certain feelings. Him being with us is this invitation to look at your entire life and all of the earth as his Holy of Holies, and to dedicate everything you do as an act of worship to him. Merry Christmas. Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us.